Welcome to the Susan Brender Show. It's all about you, featuring shows on health and wellness, the performing arts, politics, and people who inspire you to be your best. And now, here's Susan Brender.
I'm Susan Brender, and this is the Susan Brender Show. Today, we're interviewing Carl David. He is fourth-generation fine art dealer in a family-owned and operated gallery business, now in its fourth generation. Carl's latest book is Waking Dreams, The Subtle Reality, is being launched on July 15th, and I want to welcome to our show Carl David.
Thank you, Susan. It's a pleasure to be here with you today.
Well, Carl, you wrote this book, Waking Dreams, and it's the subtle reality. Tell our audience about the book and why you wrote it.
Well, Waking Dreams are actually, in my experience, episodes of synchronicity. They're signs and messages that we get from the universe, from higher levels of consciousness that we may or may not be aware of. But when you get enough of them, you start to realize, hey, there's something else going on here. And I wrote the book to share my experiences, to raise awareness to these things, for people to let them know that we're not alone and that these messages of guidance are sometimes extremely helpful.
So your goal for each work is to enlighten people?
It is. I'm on a mission to pay it forward. And with every book that I've written, the first book called Collecting and Care of Fine Art, having been in the art business for 45 years, I felt, and this was actually going back a few years, that the information that I've learned and gleaned should be shared with the rest of the world so they know how the art world works, why it works. And, art has become a very serious investment vehicle, and it's much more than just about the money. But when the money gets to a certain point at a certain level, people need to know that they can get out of it if they ever have to or need to, and that it is a viable investment. But there's so much investment hype in the art market in general that it's hard to just the reality from the hype. So I wrote that book to share my experience and pay that forward and enlighten consumers, level the playing field. The next book I wrote was called Baderfield, How My Family Survived Suicide, because having gone through that when I was 16 with an older brother who took his life, he was 22. After you never really get through it, and you never get over it. You only learn to live with it as best you can. But I realized at some point that I wanted to share this experience again with the world, because more than 1 million people a year take their life worldwide, and it's at an epidemic level. And the only way we're going to slow this hideous thing down is by exposure and education and awareness. So initially the book was homage to my dad, who only lived 8 years after my brother took his life. And as it grew over the decades, the book became a much more important work, and it really became a nonfiction family saga, but with a multi-purpose, of doing just that, of raising awareness to this issue and hoping that I can reach out and save somebody's life. I may or may never not know, and that doesn't really matter, but I've put it out there, and without any expectations except that this thing will have legs of its own and, benefit somebody. If somebody's thinking about taking their life, maybe they'll think twice. Maybe they'll see the wrath of pain and horror that it leaves on a family if they're in the frame of mind that they're able to see that, and they'll choose to live, not die. And, I also wrote it to help other people and other families who've gone through it, because I'm not the only one, obviously, and they need to know that we do survive. It takes a momentous effort and a lot of time and a lot of help. This is something that's too big for any individual to handle on their own. And the latest book, The Waking Dreams, I also felt the same thing, to pay this forward and share these experiences, because every one of these experiences that I've had needs to be shared and put out there so it can help other people.
So can you give some examples of waking dreams that you have had?
Yes, I can. One of the ones that's very poignant is at a time when we were at the cemetery at my father's funeral, and it was a hot August day, and we were all there, and suddenly we hear an airplane, and I look up, and it happens to be a Piper Aztec, and it's circling above us, and I looked at my wife, my mother, my brother. We all looked at each other, and we knew that was my father, because he was a pilot as well as an art dealer, and the last plane that he owned was a Piper Aztec.
Cool.
And we knew that this was his way of letting us know that he was free, he was okay, not to worry, and that life goes on.
So you believe in these kinds of, aren't they a little bit mystical experiences? You really believe that happened?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, maybe if that were the only thing or the only time it ever happened to me, I would question it, because when it first happens to you, you do question it. You wonder if you're losing your mind. Is this real? Did this really just happen? Yeah, but it's happened so many times in my life, over and over again, and I've seen it with other people, and other people that I've spoken to have had similar experiences that, that it's the same kind of spiritual thing, that because you can't see something doesn't mean that it doesn't exist.
So
I'll give you another example real quick. We bought our first boat years ago because my wife and I were sitting in bed one night watching a marina open up that we hadn't even known existed. And I went down the next day and I got a slip. I didn't have a boat yet. So when we finally got the boat, we're coming down the Delaware River, and overhead crosses a Piper Aztec. And my wife and I looked at each other, and we knew this was my father's, his blessing. And it happened again when we upgraded to another boat 3 years later. Except this one had no paint on it. It was definitively a Piper Aztec. I knew that airplane like I knew my soul. And it crossed overhead right in front of us, and there were no numbers on it. There was no paint, and it was a Piper Aztec. And this was a second acknowledgement, and it was a second endorsement of what we were doing with regard. Well, the third thing, the second one with the boat, but the third time we had seen a Piper Aztec at an event, and it was very, very powerful.
Wow. So do you know other people who've had waking dreams?
I do. And since the book has come out, it was launched on the 15th of July. I've been getting emails and phone calls and running into people on the street who recognize me from my picture on the back of the book. And they all get the concept because they've all had these experiences, and they start to tell me about the ones that they've had. And it's eerie, if you will, but it's very comforting and consoling.
Yeah, and Carl, since you are having these kinds of waking dreams, and other people too, do you think that they will continue?
Oh, they'll definitely continue. They have continued. I keep thinking, well, maybe I should have waited longer to bring the book out because I could have included this episode or that episode. But, at some point maybe I'll write an addendum to the book. But they don't stop. You're open to them.
Does everyone get these communications, Carl?
I don't know if everyone gets them, but I know that they're out there, and if people are open to the idea that they exist and they believe in them and they give them a chance, that they will receive them, yes. I think some people are closed off to the idea and think that this is just really, hocus pocus or whatever, but just because you can't see something doesn't mean it doesn't exist. You can't see electricity. You can't see the wind. You can only see the effect of what either of those things do as a way of a force, and this is just another force.
And so there have been other works on metaphysical subjects like yours. How is your book different?
Mine comes from a personal experience. It's not clinical, and it's not, directly scientific. I can't measure these events scientifically. It's not my focus. It's not my specialty. But these are just experiences that I've had that I felt people could relate to and relate with.
That leads me to asking you if, when you mention this book to people, how do they react?
Most of them react very favorably. They're very interested, and they almost all say, "Oh, God, I had an experience like that. Wow, this is amazing. I thought I was the only one. I thought I was alone. I thought I was crazy." So the more that this information gets out there, the more people understand these things, and they're more open to them.
We'll get back to this point, but first I want to learn a little bit about you. Tell us about your businesses, the fact that you're an art dealer and a writer. Where did the motivation come from to do this sort of thing?
Well, the family art business has been there, and after college I had an opportunity to do any number of different career choices, and I decided I wanted to come back in the family business. So I did. I took my business degree from college and thought I would change everything around, which I learned rather quickly. You don't change the rules of the street, but I incorporated some of the business practices that I learned. And, having grown up in this this entire business of art. It was fascinating to me, and it was something I really felt that I wanted to do and I could be good at. I had the distillation of my grandfather's experience, my father's experience, my older brother's experience, and then it was my turn. And after my dad passed away in 1973, I had only been in the business for 3 years. My brother said, I had another brother, an oldest brother, eldest brother, said to me he was only going to stay for 9 months. So I got my act together very quickly, and within that first year, I was dealing and I was running the business. My brother wound up staying for 9 years, which was great, but I had to be prepared nonetheless. And it only got to a point where we were giving seminars to collectors groups and entertaining groups of people to share the art world with them at different events. And I said to my brother one day, I'm going to write a book. And we do these seminars, we do these collectors groups. I'm going to put it into a book form. And he said, go ahead. And I did. I wrote it in 9 months, 10 months. Crown published it for me in New York in 1981. And it's actually coming out again. I've updated and revised it. It's coming out with Skyhorse Publishing in the fall of 2015 because even though the theories and practices have maintained a constant, the numbers have changed and the texture of the business is a bit different. So I just thought it was time to update it and bring it out again. I think it's very timely.
Mm-hmm. And so collecting and the care of fine art is something that you probably find very stimulating and exciting. Am I correct?
Absolutely. I mean, it's a passion for us, and it's something we do, and we always look for that next treasure, that next discovery, that the excitement when something so incredible comes along really wakes you up and makes you feel good about being an art dealer. Someone asked us once why we do this, and we said, we provide beauty for people in their homes. It adds a dimension on their walls. It takes them on voyages and takes them to places where an artist was. And my father used to tell me the difference between good, better, and best is if you look at a painting or an object of art, any art form, and you feel what that artist felt when he was doing this, whether it was a photograph or a painting or a sculpture, then it's a great work of art. And it doesn't have to be expensive. It just has to translate that emotion and give you that feeling of wow, when you look at it.
So who are some of your favorite artists?
I still love the French Impressionist painters. I love Monet and Manet and Renoir and Cézanne, but I also love the American painters of the same school, the American Impressionists. But I also like the Hudson River School, which was a group of artists who started out and worked along the Hudson River in the 1840s, and they went from Maine down to Florida. But it was the luminous landscape that captured their imagination, the sunsets, the sunrises, the crisp atmospheric works that are just so incredible. When you look at them, it's like you're looking out a window into a landscape. So I like all those. It's really hard for me to define what I like the most. It could be an image by nobody that just is so well done and so incredibly powerful that it doesn't matter if it's signed, it's not signed. I mean, the kind of things that my wife and I collect are just images of beauty that we relate to, that just make us feel good to look at.
Yeah. And so we know you're a writer, and we also know that you are an arts dealer, but do you ever paint?
I have not tried painting. I'm more oriented toward music. I've become a songwriter, and I was in 2 rock groups when I was younger. I started out playing the guitar, piano, then the guitar, and then back to keyboards. But I have not tried painting. I may at some point to see if I can draw anything more than stick figures. I don't know.
Well, I suppose you can, because you have that artistic flair. But, you just mentioned music. I know that for me, that music transforms me in ways I can't even imagine. And so I'm just curious about you. Don't you feel that art and music transform you in ways that, as I said, you can't imagine?
Oh, absolutely. When I go into my studio at home and I turn on the keyboard and put my headphones on, I can play for hours and just ramble, but it feels good. It does take you to a place that it's an escape. Yeah. And it's very soothing and it's enlightening and it just feels good.
Mm-hmm. And so also, the average person who is buying art can't necessarily afford a Monet or a Manet, but what can you offer that is not so expensive? I mean, outrageously expensive.
Oh, you can find great artwork for, even hundreds of dollars and lower thousands. It doesn't have to be hundreds of thousands or not even tens of thousands. It's just the prices are always commensurate with the name, so that if you're looking at great French Impressionist paintings, they're going to bring a premium compared to other things that may be a little more obscure, but still have great quality. So it's just something that has to tug at you, because this is something you're going to be looking at. It's not a stock certificate you're going to put in a bank vault. These things are to be enjoyed aesthetically, and it doesn't matter what they are. And what, some people love sculpture, they won't even look at paintings. Other people love paintings and not interested in sculpture. Other people like great works of art in furniture form or fine jewels. All these things come in all different price ranges, and, the old expression, beauty is in the eye of the beholder. Mm-hmm. And it's true.
It is true. And for you, if you had a chance right now to get something that you could put on your wall, what artist would you choose?
Oh, that's a tough question. I would probably go to the Metropolitan Museum and take the painting by Frederick Church of the Andes of Ecuador.
How interesting. Yeah, and also with regard to music, you mentioned that you play. Is there any specific type of music that you play?
I have been writing ballads. They're all instrumental, and oddly enough, since I'm a writer, I can't put lyrics to my music. I mean, it seems kind of bizarre and counterintuitive, and maybe because I haven't really tried. But the music that I write are flowing ballads there are a couple on my website. One is kind of a retro 80s feel, and that's not really a ballad, although it's an instrumental. But the other one I wrote for my wife, and it's very moving. And I had it actually arranged by Dave Appel, who recently passed away, but he was legendary. He was with Decca Records and Cameo Parkway Records and the Applejacks. He used to write for Chubby Checker. He wrote for the theme song for American Bandstand. So I was very privileged to have a gentleman like that think enough of one of the pieces that I wrote to professionally arrange it.
Yeah, it sounds very impressive. I agree that when you write something and, again, people listen to it and love it, it must be absolutely thrilling. But let's get to another issue now for a moment. You have this, shall we say, creative side. And do you attribute it to your family business, your father or your mother? Who has really, truly in your life inspired you to get involved as a writer and a musician, et cetera, et cetera?
Well, music was part of my life from the time I was a kid. I had to take the proverbial piano lessons, so I was exposed to it. My father played the piano. We spoke, French as well as English in our household. And we were privileged to have been exposed to all these cultural aspects that obviously rubbed off on me. And, the music stayed with me. Writing was something that I couldn't do. I couldn't write a composition to save my life in high school, and that was probably because after losing my brother, I just didn't care. My focus was gone. My passion for almost everything was just, set at a minimum at that point, and I was really floundering. But when I got to college, and I'd gone to Temple University for 2 years, and again, my focus wasn't there, so I got thrown out, and I got reinstated. I was more interested in non-academic things at the time, and my parents said, you need a smaller school. So we went and looked all over the place, and I wound up at Oglethorpe College in Atlanta, which was a liberal arts school, very small. I think we had about 1,500 kids at the time, and all of the professors were retired captains of industry. It was a perfect place. It was great. And in those 2 years, I became very ardent about what I was doing. I was on the Spanish Honor Society. I was on the dean's list. I decided it was really time to apply myself. I had to do this not just for my parents, who went all out to get me there, but for myself to see what I could wind up doing with my life, because I wasn't doing anything at that point. And my first foray into writing was for the school newspaper because the food was so atrocious at the time. I'd gag when I walk into the cafeteria, so I said, I have to write a letter. So I wrote this letter for the school newspaper, and they said they would publish it, but they wouldn't put my name on it because they didn't want me to get thrown out of this school, too. So that was, and it was a scathing review of the food, and it was kind of funny. I still look at it. I kept a copy of it, and it's really kind of humorous, and it's satirical, and it was the beginning of my writing career. And then I started writing articles, and the Collecting a Care of Fine Art was the next book. Bader Field had no subtitle for a long time. That was the last place I saw my dad, so that's where I titled the book. I wouldn't have done it today like I did it then, but and for a while it wasn't selling, it wasn't responding to anything, so we decided nobody knew what Bader Field was. Was it an airfield? Was it a baseball field? If you weren't from the Philadelphia, Atlantic City area, you had no clue, unless you were a pilot and you used to fly in and out of there, which my father and I did. So we subtitled it, How My Family Survived Suicide, and then it had a brand, and people knew there's a story here. So that book took me decades to write. Initially writing did not come easily to me, but it became a passion. And now with this third book, it was just something that I had to do, and I know there'll be a fourth book, forthcoming. I don't know what it'll be just yet, but I'm not finished writing.
Yeah, and tell us, if you were to have a group of young people, what advice would you give them about getting involved in the music business or in the art business?
I would tell them to follow their passions. Don't quit. Set your goals. Go for them. Whether somebody says you can't do that or you're never going to make it, you're going to fail, it's impossible, it's a tough business to get into, don't listen to that. Just reach for your goals and don't quit, because if you quit, you lose. Just never give up. And as bleak as life might seem at times, there's always tomorrow if you're lucky enough to get up that morning. Life is a gift, and don't abuse it. Use it to the fullest, enjoy it, and never, ever quit.
That's a very wise information. Now, we're going to take a short break, and I want our audience to know that we're talking to Carl Davis, who has written an incredible book called Waking Dreams, The Subtle Reality. And he's also an artist, and he is also a writer and a musician. He's really very special. So we'll be back in just a couple of moments.
Cool off with a delicious treat at FYI Frozen Yogurt and Ice Cream Shop in beautiful Delray Beach, Florida. FYI offers more than 20 flavors of ice cream, frozen yogurt, Italian gelato, sorbet, protein shakes, and more. FYI also caters birthday parties or any special occasion. Enjoy these wonderful treats in our cool, breezy, kid-friendly cafe. That looks good. Can Mommy have a taste?
They're mine.
Oh well. You can receive a free small cone of frozen yogurt or ice cream if you say the magic words, Susan sent you. Don't forget to pick up a coupon for $1 off your next purchase. They're located at 9 Northeast 2nd Avenue in Pineapple Grove, Delray Beach, Florida. They're open 7 days a week. For store hours or more information, call 561-450-7402. This commercial brought to you by FYI Frozen Yogurt and Ice Cream Shop and the Susan Brender Show. See you there.
Okay, now we're back with Carl David. So, Carl, do other people who have had waking dreams contact you from time to time?
They do, and it's very interesting to hear the experiences that other people have had. I had someone contacted me. Well, he didn't contact me. I'm a member at the Union League Club in Philadelphia, and I was sitting next to this fellow one night, and we were talking about, what do you do, and what do you do? And I mentioned the books, and he said, I had an incredible experience like that. He said, we were driving to the cemetery burying my mom, and it was a snowy day, and it was very gray and bleak. He said, we got to the area where the cemetery plot was, and there was no sun came down through the gray clouds. He said it was just unbelievable. It was like the heavens had opened up just for us. And I said, well, that was her way of communicating with you that, she was there for you, and she would still be there for you.
Yeah, that's really very special. There have been other works on metaphysical subjects like yours. How is your book different?
Well, my book is different because it comes from a very personal viewpoint, and I tell these short stories of these different experiences that I've had.
There have been other works on metaphysical subjects like yours. How is your book different?
Well, mine really comes from a personal collection of experiences that are not really scientific. No, it's not.
There have been other works on metaphysical subjects like yours. How is your book different?
Well, a lot of those are scientifically documented books. Mine is a work that just comes from the heart. It's personal experience, and I wrote it that way because I know that people will relate to it on the same level that I am putting out there.
Okay, so we're just at the end of our show, and you mentioned your website. Would you say something about how people get in touch with you and give them your website information or whatever other information you'd like to give them?
Sure, I'd be happy to do that. My main website is www.carledavid.com. It's CarleDavid, all one word, .com. I can also be reached through our gallery websites, which are www.davidgallery.com. CarleDavid at Gmail is my Gmail address. It's CarleDavid@gmail.com. I can also be reached through Motivational Press, who's my publisher. And if you do a search online for Carl David or Bader Field by Carl David or Waking Dreams, The Subtle Reality by Carl David, which, by the way, is available on Amazon. It's on the Kindle. It's an easy read, and I'm out there. I mean, if you just Google my name, Carl E. David or Carl David, it'll come up in a myriad of places.
Well, I always like to give my guests the last word. So what do you have to say?
I would say stay open and aware and be awake to episodes of things like this, like synchronicity, and just because something doesn't seem visible does not mean it does not exist. So I would say live your lives to the fullest. Ask for these episodes of guidance, these signs and messages, because sometimes they come as solutions to problems. They may show up in a dream. They may show up as a newspaper clipping, a sign on the road, a license plate, a number, a song, a waft of fragrance that's familiar to you. All I can say is just believe, because they're real.
Those are very wise words. My guest today has been Carl David, who has an awful lot to offer everybody who's listening. So thank you very much, Carl David, for doing the show and being on the Susan Brender Show.
My pleasure, Susan. Thank you so much for having me.
You're quite welcome.
Thank you for listening to The Susan Brender Show.